from Ireland. Welcome back to my channel. So in this video, I'm going to ask why the campaign in Donbas is going so badly for Russia. Why is it stalling? Because you may remember it's a month ago since they ended their assault on Kiev, the Ukrainian capital, which is in the north center of Ukraine, is not so far from the border with Belarus. Belarus, of course, is Russia's closest ally, and Belarus was used as a jumping off point for Russia to invade Ukraine. Ukraine even accused Belarusian soldiers of participating in the invasion. Minsk has vehemently denied it, but of course, the Minsk regime is as rampantly and flagrantly deceitful as the Moscow regime. So, I mean, if the Belarusians did participate, I think probably not on a large scale, though notably, Belarus has begun a large military exercise on the Ukrainian border. And so President Lukashenko said, this is no threat to anyone, which is precisely what the Kremlin said about their huge scale war games in Belarus just before this illegal and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. So there was a new focus of the Russian campaign in April. They withdrew from Kiev. And they suffered tens of thousands of casualties there, and they're going to focus on Donbas, so that Don Basin region in the southeast corner of Ukraine, partly to create a land corridor from Russia through to the Crimean Peninsula, which Russia's been illegally occupying since 2014, and then, as one Russian general unwisely vouchsafed, on to Moldova, which they plan to invade and annex as well, if successful. So thank God the Ukrainians are still in the fight. Where would we be if it all gone to plan for Putin? If he had conquered Ukraine very, very swiftly, he'd be on the borders of the European Union. I mean, even more than he is already. He'd be hugely buoyed up. He'd have a big burst of popularity, and he'd think, where's my next victim? Moldova, take the whole of Georgia. Where's next? Would he even probe the defenses of NATO? Now, he's already started doing that because some Russian jets, they violated Danish airspace a few days ago, and indeed Swedish airspace. Not that Sweden is a member of NATO, though Sweden is considering applying for NATO membership, seems to be without much enthusiasm. I don't think they will apply. Finland is very seriously considering, is probably going to decide this month whether to apply or not, which would mean that Russia's got another 1,200 kilometers of frontier with NATO. A big headache for Russia because they have to guard that. They don't have enough soldiers as it is. Another point, we're always told that the Russian military is 900,000 strong, but as the Kremlin lies about everything, presumably they're lying about that too, which is why they're having such difficulties, which is why the 200,000 soldiers they committed to this invasion of Ukraine is actually a bigger chunk of their military than we'd think. We'd think that it's maybe sort of 22% of their military, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's more like 30%. So it's going so badly because they still haven't sorted out their logistics, which we thought they would. This is a lot easier for them fighting on one axis than on three. They don't have to go so far into hostile territory. And what else? Yeah, as the ground has thawed out, it's May now. They can drive off the road. They're not sinking into the mud. But they haven't sorted out the endemic problems of poor leadership, of excessive centralization. It's such an authoritarian system. Like most things in former Soviet countries, even the most trifling decision has to be referred all the way up to the chain of command, wait for them to make a decision, and that's relayed all the way down the chain of command, which is why things are so slow and people are afraid to take initiative. And then the people right at the top have to receive the message, because if you're the lowest down, you have to ask someone who asked someone who asked someone, and it might be buried deep in the in tray of the Supremo. I think it's unimportant, forget about it, finally make a decision, the order comes back down, and things might have moved on. It's impossible to do, or whatever. And that's why they're so slow. Having known enough guys who served in the Russian military, the one thing that's dinned into them, you never do anything without orders. You do not advance, you do not retreat, you do not open fire, you don't cease fire if you've been ordered to open fire. And the perennial problem of corruption, of a lot of military assets being stolen, like winter tires, have to use winter tires from November to March, being sold off and then using summer tires in winter when they shouldn't. So winter tires have got greater grip, so you're not going to slide on the ice so much and the snow, but obviously they're heavier. There's more, because there's more traction, there's more friction, and it uses more fuel. But anyway, but if you don't use it in the winter, you're more likely to slide and crash and things like that. And they've been so they also don't maintain their roads. Far outside Moscow, the roads are in a parlous state. So even getting to the battlefront sometimes been a problem with the potholes and whatever. Or some trains derail, they're not maintaining their railway system. So just not getting the rudiments of soldiering right. As one American ex-military man said to me, they just wouldn't have passed out of boot camp, a lot of these guys. So poorly officered, and obviously the stops with Putin, who's never been a soldier for a single day. Neither have I, but I don't go around wearing military uniforms all the time. So, we could see on paper how big the military forces of the Ukrainians and the Russians are, but the one thing they couldn't quantify was morale. And the Ukrainians have got so much more fighting spirit. They're fighting for their homeland. The Russians were lied to, told they weren't going to fight at all. Then it was a special military operation. It was going to be over in days. Here we are. We're into the third month. So it's one of those conflicts which people think is going to be over in weeks and last much, much longer. Remember, the First World War was going to be all over by Christmas. It was going to last 4 months. In fact, it lasted over 4 years. So this might be something similar. And now that NATO see that it's actually worth backing the Ukrainians, they're giving them loads of arms, having to fund them. It's going to be over $5 billion a month just to sustain things, just to pay the salaries or whatever. Um, so the Russians they depleted their ammunition stock so much, they've expended so much munitions because they're just blowing up everything out of sheer malice, and thinking, well, it's a slow but it's an effectual strategy, which they've employed successfully in their own country, in Chechnya, in Syria, to some extent against Georgia. But then they're actually running out of ammunition, having to get resupply, which is a headache for them, rather than being selective and only blowing up things they actually need to destroy. And then another point is some of these Russian missiles. They say you open them up and they found the electronics are all, say, made in the USA or manufactured in the European Union, and they won't be sold anymore. So they're going to have a big problem. For over 20 years, Putin's talked about autarky, sanctioning, proofing the economy, and he's not managed to do it. Diversifying the economy away from hydrocarbon exports. Well, he's not managed to do it. And just today, the European Union has announced, Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, that the European Union is trying to phase out all Russian oil purchases and refined product purchases by the end of 2022. Now, there might be exemptions for Slovakia and Bulgaria, not Bulgaria, sorry, and Hungary because of their over-dependence on Russian oil. Otherwise, they'd veto it, I suppose. But other countries will say, well, if they don't have to stop buying Russian oil, why should we have to stop buying Russian oil? Now, even if the European Union can't agree on this jointly, they could do it severally. Some European Union member states stop buying Russian oil, others continue. People have always been moaning about the Germans continuing to purchase Russian hydrocarbons, but they say it would have such a deleterious effect on their economy, they wouldn't be able to fund the Ukrainians if they cut it off completely. So they at least have reduced it very substantially, even since the war began. And the Russians will make this absolutely bogus accusation that the Ukrainians are all Nazis, which is just a foul slur from Putin's regime, which behaves in a genuinely Nazi manner. And then always trying to shame the Germans because your country did evil 80 years ago, therefore you're always evil. No, that's ridiculous. That's outrageous and racist. So Germany's reacted the right way to the Third Reich, to now trying to be the most humane country of all. And indeed, they are a very humane country. And no, they can't be guilt tripped about this. Of course, some of their ancestors did the most appalling things, committed heinous crimes on a huge scale, which behoves them even more to help the Ukrainians when they're under attack from this barbaric regime in the Kremlin. So yeah, it's going badly in Donbass for various reasons. Obviously, shortage of troops, just exhaustion of some of the same troops in the field, poorly trained troops, poorly led, demoralized, demotivated, logistics still not being sorted out, providing them with ammunition, food, and fuel on time, and then pursuing this poor strategy. So many generals getting popped by snipers. General Gerasimov himself actually came to the front because he was getting these rosy reports from his subordinates, and he said, well, why aren't you making progress? And yes, they have made some headway. They've been pushed back in other sectors, but the progress is at a snail's pace. More civilians were evacuated from the Azovstal factory in Mariupol, about 150 of them. And the Russians, they've renewed their strike on Mariupol, and really trying to finish it off. Did they think if they let more civilians out, the soldiers would be willing to surrender? I'm not sure. I don't know how these people will get going. I mean, the heroism of the defenders of that steelworks is legendary. I don't know how they've hung on for months without reinforcements. Must be so low on ammunition. You'd think they'd run out of food, medicine, water, everything, and how they haven't just died, but going to sell their lives at a very, very high price. Their stubborn resistance, their resilience is really a marvel to behold. So the world's staring in amazement at them. Do I think the war will end by the 9th of May? No, I don't actually, because he won't even have captured the whole of Donbass by then. And they say he's mulling actually declaring war on the 9th of May. I mean, Putin's press secretary said, no, absolutely not. But, he said that about loads of things, which they've gone to done, like this war against Ukraine. So they lie and lie and lie. They might even declare war. because then they could generally mobilize people and call up more people. They've already called up some reserves, so they're going to serve till at least the 1st of July. And really put it on a war footing. And actually, apparently, the Russian top brass has complained that there's a lack of commitment. They need total commitment throughout everything we have at this. And that Ruskies are actually very circumspect with their air force. They got a 10-to-1 advantage in planes, and they've not used it. They've only had about 60 planes shot down because they've been so cautious. The Ukrainian Air Force, air defense is fairly good. Their air force is fairly formidable. They're heavily outnumbered. With the Russians, they just threw everything they had at it, all their planes, and okay, a few hundred of them were shot down, but they would defeat Ukraine. They would crush Ukraine, but there's not a price they're willing to pay, and they have to conserve their air assets because I suppose this is only the beginning. They want to conquer more and more and more. So it's lunatic, it's madcap, it's destructive. Putin has been such a cataclysm for Russia in other ways. Imagine he hadn't done all this. Fast forward back to when he first got involved in Syria, first invaded Ukraine, and Russia could be hundreds of billions of dollars better off, maybe trillions of dollars are better off, if he hadn't allowed this massive scale corruption and kleptocracy, hadn't squandered all this money in the military, and then still not even be able to defeat Ukraine. They could be much freer, much happier, much more prosperous people. But he's a megalomaniac. Anyway, so Mariupol's going to fall. I'm just stunned it hasn't fallen. Already. I doff my cap to them. I hold my manhood cheap that they managed to do this, that they have such gallantry to hold out against these just overwhelming and impossible odds. But I suppose they've made their peace with it. They know that they're going to die, and they will have the satisfaction of bringing down as many of their enemies with them as they possibly can. So that's why it's going on like this. And now NATO is providing more assets and heavier weapons and becoming a bit more audacious about it. These are German howitzers of the 42-mile range, so they can pound the Russians. The Russians won't be able to pummel them back. And actually, the war's going to go on for a long time, so it's actually worthwhile training the Ukrainians and things which take a few weeks to learn. And more of the Ukrainian civilian population might be called up, more foreign volunteers might arrive, and so on. Russia never stood a chance against Ukraine. Well, I don't agree, actually. I mean, if they'd had decent training or they'd actually maintained their vehicles, they had some decent leadership, yeah, they could have done so. If they had been willing to be a bit more daring and take greater risks with their air force, then yeah, they could have. All right, thank you for watching. Toodle pip.